Biodiversity, and it is an honor to welcome you to this side event, to the high-level political forum on Sustainable Development Agenda, which aims to find ways how advancing gender equality and human rights to stop the biodiversity crisis. This event is organized by Women for Biodiversity and FARM and co-convened by UN Women, OHCHR, UNEP WCMC, and WWF. Before starting, I would give some guidelines to make the most of this session for everyone. First, kindly rename yourself with your name and organization, so we all are aware of the diversity of people gathered today. And if you want, you can also use the chat box to introduce yourself, telling us from which country you are and the main activities your organization does. Secondly, if you have any questions, comments, please type them down in the chat box and indicate for whom among the speakers your question is to facilitate the process of answering. Para aquellas personas que necesitan interpretación al español, les pedimos que den clic en el botón con firma de globo que aparece en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionen la interpretación al español. Muchas gracias. For those French speakers, we deeply apologize because today we won't be able to provide interpretation for your language. For everyone, please note that the event is live streamed on the Facebook page of Women for Biodiversity, and kindly help us spread the word and share the video with your networks. Share your insights using the following hashtags: gender is a biodiversity issue, SDG 5, SDG 14, and SDG 15. And remember to tag us at Women for Biodiversity and all of our co-conveners today. Well, now please let's begin. And I would like to start making explicit the objectives we would like to achieve with this session. They are particularly two. First one is build synergies between the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals, high-level political forum processes to build back better from COVID-19. And the second objective is to showcase specific recommendations from the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework discussion in mainstreaming and strengthening the human rights-based approach to achieving SDGs 5, 14, and 15. And to do so, we have the honor of having Silvia Hordos, Policy Advisor and Intergovernmental Support at UN Women, who will provide the opening remarks for this event. And we also have our 5 stars panel, integrated by Catherine Scott Belmonte, Senior Program Officer at the UN Environment Program World Conservation Monitoring Center, Cristina Egenter, Global Governance Policy Coordinator at WWF International, Shruti Ajit, Program Officer at Women for Biodiversity, and Benjamin Schachter, Human Rights Officer and Environment Team Leader at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Please welcome all of them. And I will give now the mic to Silvia Hordos, Policy Advisor and Intergovernmental Support at UN Women, to share with us your initial thoughts on how advancing gender equality and human rights will contribute to stopping the biodiversity crisis. Please, Silvia, thank you so much for being with us.
Por favor, gracias por estar con nosotros.
Give us your thoughts.
Y darnos sus pensamientos.
Silvia, we cannot hear you, sorry.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
I was saying thank you very much for being here.
Gracias por estar acá. Gracias por la oportunidad.
Today is
Hoy día
at the HLPF, but obviously for all of us here,
estar aquí
gender equality is central to what we do every day.
es central en lo que hacemos todos los días
Work.
de nuestro trabajo.
Gender Inequality coupled with
y
climate and
desigualdad
environmental
de
crisis
género
are the
mezclado
greatest
con el
sustainable development
con el programa de
challenges of our
biodiversidad
time.
es uno
As
de los
this
principales
year's
problemas de
HLPF
nuestro tiempo.
reviews progress
En
towards
el
SDG
evento
5 on
HLPF
gender equality, together with
para
goals
juntar
14 and
los
15 on
Objetivos de
land,
Desarrollo
below
Sostenible
water and on land.
14 y
And
15
as we prepare for the
de agua
finalization and the adoption of the
submarina
post-2020
y
Global
la
Biodiversity
adopción del
Framework
marco
later
postglobal
this year,
2020 en
we
este
have now an
año,
important opportunity
tenemos
to
una
explore the
oportunidad importante
synergies
de explorar
between
las
these two
sinergias
distinct
entre estas
and
dos
complementary processes.
procesos distintos y
Despite progress
complementarios.
in some areas,
A
we know
pesar
that the
de los
world
problemas
is
en
not
algunas
on
áreas,
track
sabemos
to
que el
achieve
mundo no
gender equality
está
by
en el
2030.
camino para
Out of
alcanzar
18
la
indicators
equidad
for
de
SDG
género en el
5, 9
2030.
have been achieved, and
Ninguno
only
de los
one is
objetivos
close
del
to
SDG
target
15
at this point.
no han
The
sido
distance remaining
alcanzados y
is
solamente
long
uno está
and
cerca
time
de
is
la meta.
short. And of
Para
course, the
alcanzarlo es lento y el tiempo es
COVID-19
corto, y
pandemic
la
has
pandemia del
pushed back the
COVID-19
limited progress reached.
ha
The linkages with goals
llevado
14 and
atrás
15 are
todas
clear.
las acciones que estamos
Women's
hecho.
greater dependence on and unequal
Las
access to
mujeres
natural resources,
greatness
public
dependen
services, and
de los servicios
infrastructure
públicos,
mean
de
they are
infraestructura
disproportionately
pública,
impacted
y
by
es
environmental
desproporcionada por
degradation and climate
la
change.
degradación
On indicators
climática
related to
y
target
la pérdida de
5.8,
diversidad.
those related to ownership and secure rights over agricultural land and
También los
laws
problemas
guaranteeing
del
equal land
territorio
rights,
de la
we don't
agricultura,
even
las
have
tierras de agricultura,
sufficient data
no
at this stage
tenemos
to measure
data
progress.
suficiente para medir el progreso, esos avances.
Insecure land rights make women especially
Los
vulnerable to
derechos
land grabbing for large-scale
de
environmental projects.
los
These
derechos de no obtener la
indicators
tierra
are relevant
hace
to
que
the
las mujeres sean
post-2020
inseguras,
Global
y
Biodiversity
estos
Framework,
indicadores son
and they provide an
importantes
opportunity to
para el marco
align
global
the 2030
2020
agenda
y hace
and
una oportunidad para alinearnos
the
a
new
la
indicator
Agenda
framework.
2030 y el nuevo
While it is
marco global
important
de
to acknowledge
indicadores.
that women suffer
Es importante
disproportionate
reconocer
impacts
que
from
las
biodiversity
mujeres
loss
van
and
a
climate
sufrir
change,
una
it is
desigualdad
vital to
importante con el
recognize women
cambio
as
climático. Es
actors
importante
and
que las
agents of
mujeres sean
change and
reconocidas
rights
como
holders
actores y como
in the
actores de
conservation and
cambio
sustainable
en la
use of
conservación y sostenible
biodiversity.
de la
And
diversidad
it is
biológica.
important to
Y es
ensure the
importante
full,
asegurar
equal and effective participation in
una
decision
igualdad,
making and leadership
una
related to
participación
biodiversity.
igualitaria
As you
en,
know,
en
earlier
esas
this year, the
actividades
Commission on the Status of
y
Women
igual cantidad de
recognized the
líderes.
disproportionate gendered impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters on women and girls. In the outcome of the Commission's agreed conclusions, governments committed to integrate gender perspectives into the design, funding,
una perspectiva de género
implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of relevant policies and programs on
funciones
climate
monetarias
change
para
and environmental
abordar el
degradation.
cambio climático y la
Governments
degradación
also agreed
biodiversidad.
that they must increase financing for
También
gender response to climate,
se necesita
environmental, and
aumentar
disaster
la
initiatives
respuesta
and
y
support
las iniciativas y el
women's
soporte de
organizations,
las organizaciones de las
enterprises, and
mujeres
cooperatives.
y de las cooperativas.
Really importantly for this
Es muy
discussion,
importante para
the
esta
Commission
discusión
also called to strengthen normative, legal, and regulatory frameworks to fulfill existing
para
commitments
pedir
under the Rio
los
Convention,
comunitos de las
also taking
convenciones
into account the Gender Action Plan.
para las
All these
acciones de género.
recommendations are highly relevant
Las
to
recomendaciones
both
son muy
the
importantes
HLPF
para las
and the
HLPF y
post-2020
para el
Global Biodiversity
post-2020 marco global.
Over the years, UN
En el
Women has
año, las
engaged
mujeres han
with the
tenido que
Convention on
comprometerse con la
Biological
Convención
Diversity
de la
by
Biodiversidad,
making
la Convención de Diversidad
submissions on
Biológica, para hacer
gender perspectives,
sumisiones,
organizing workshops,
perspectiva de
meetings with
género,
experts,
organizar
and partnering
talleres,
with
reuniones con
organizations
expertos,
such as
organizaciones
those
como
in this panel.
nosotros en este
We have
panel.
advocated for a transformative and gender
Hemos
responsive
pedido para
post-2020 biodiversity
que sea
framework
transformativo
and
en
a
el género
standalone target with gender
y
equality
que haya
priority. There are
un
three
objetivo
key
solo de
priorities
género. Son
that we
nuestras
would like to
prioridades
see
claves que nos
reflected
gustaría que sean
in
reflejadas
actions related
en
to
las
the
acciones
Convention.
relacionadas
One
con la
is
Convención.
women's
Una
full and
es
effective participation
la
in decision-making.
participación total de las
Two,
mujeres
equal rights to
la toma de
and
decisiones
control over land and
y que
resources.
puedan
And
controlar y que
third,
tengan
equal access to
acceso a la tierra
benefits
y
derived from
a los
resources.
recursos y que tengan
A
igual
gender-specific
equidad de
target
género
serves
al
to
acceder a
guide all
esto.
biodiversity-related planning, policies,
Que la
funding, and
equidad de género
implementation,
guíe todas
clearly from a
las
gender lens. And I would add also from a human rights lens.
guíe todas las
A
acciones
gender-specific
de
target will also
planes.
ensure that funds are allocated
Una
to
meta
progress
sola
towards those
va a
priorities.
ayudarnos a lograr esos
We look forward
objetivos.
to continue
Queremos
working
continuar
with partners like you
con
and
socios como
parties
ustedes y
towards a
partes
gender-responsive global
para tener una
biodiversity framework
diversidad que
to contribute to
sea,
achieving
que tenga respuesta de
also
género y también
the
para
sustainable
lograr
development goals, including goals 5
los
to
objetivos de
15.
desarrollo sostenible,
Thank you
incluidos
very much.
las metas 14 y 15. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Silvia, for this
Gracias,
work.
Silvia,
You
por este
definitely show us
trabajo.
that the
Nos
topic
has
we are
mostrado
discussing this,
que
this
lo
session
que
is
estábamos
urgent, key, relevant, and promoting synergies
Lo que
between
estamos
development and environmental
discutiendo
policies are really
en este taller es muy
crucial.
importante
And more
y es
even
crucial
they are crossed with
y,
the human rights and gender equality approach.
y también se
And
mezcla
with this
con,
context established, we
con los
are now
enfoques de
going to
desarrollo.
move on to our panel discussion.
Ahora vamos
Not
a
without
empezar
first
con nuestra
reminding
discusión
you,
de
dear
panel.
audience, that if you have comments or
Si es que
questions during the session,
tienen
please
discusiones
write
o
them down in the chat
preguntas en la
box, because
sesión,
later on
escríbanlo en
we
el
will
chat porque
dedicate
después
30
vamos a
minutes
dedicar 30
so that
minutos
there is a dialogue between you
para que
and the
haya un
panel.
diálogo entre ustedes y el panel.
And now moving into the round one of this
Ahora
discussion,
moviendo a la
to
pregunta de la
highlight
discusión
opportunities to
para
enhance
resaltar las
enhance synergies
oportunidades
between the
para
Convention on
demostrar las
Biodiversity
sinergias entre la
and the
Convención de Diversidad
SDGs,
Biológica
in
y el
particular
Desarrollo
analyzing how the
Sostenible, en particular
implementation of the
analizar cómo la implementación
post-2020
del post-2020
GBF can help
marco
achieve
global
SDG 5
puede
and
lograr
contribute
el
to
Objetivo de
SDGs
Desarrollo
14
Sostenible
and
5
15
de
and
equidad de
others.
género y contribuir con el
We want to focus on the
ODS
synergies
14, 15 y
between these two
17 y
agendas.
avanzar
And the main questions are,
entre
how could the implementation of the post-2020 Global
los derechos
Biodiversity
humanos. En esa
Framework
pregunta,
contribute to achieving
cómo la
SDG 5
implementación
on
del
gender equality,
post-2020
SDG 14
Marco Global de
on life, food and
Diversidad
water,
va a
and
contribuir
SDG
en
15
lograr
life on
el
land,
ODS
and
15
advance human
equidad de género,
rights.
SD 14
In
vida
relation to
submarina, SDG
SDG
15
5,
vida en la
we
tierra
ask
y
the panel
SDG
to focus
17
on
de
what are the
alianzas
most
y
promising
avanzar
strategies and actions today for
con
overcoming
los
gender
derechos humanos.
inequality
En
and
relación con SDG
discrimination,
15, ¿cuáles
and
son
how
las
can the
más
empowerment of
estrategias
women
más
and
prometedoras
girls
y acciones
accelerate
que hoy
SDG
día
progress,
pueden
but also help to
lograrnos
recovery from
sobreponernos a la
COVID-19
inequidad
and
de género y
implement the
discriminación y cómo el
biodiversity agenda?
empoderamiento de las mujeres y
And
de las niñas
concerning
puede
SDG 14
acelerar
and
el
15,
progreso del
we would like
ODS,
our panel to tell
recuperarnos del
us
COVID-19 y
about
implementar el
concrete measures.
post-2020
How could
y
these measures
cómo
could help reshape the human-nature
y sobre
relationship
el
and
SDG
set
14 y
a
15,
development
qué
on a more
medidas concretas
sustainable path?
pueden
Please,
hacernos
I kindly provide some
volver
examples while addressing these questions.
replantearnos
To
las
start the
relaciones
conversation,
humano-naturaleza
we want
y
to
ver
hear
un
from you,
desarrollo
Ben
y
Schaffer,
un
from the
camino
Human
más
Rights Officer
sustentable y
Office
cómo
on
podemos
Human
crear
Rights.
un momento para
Please, the floor is yours.
crear acciones alrededor del post-2020 y si es que pueden proveer algunas
and greetings, everybody.
preguntas
My
sobre
name is
esto.
Ben Schachter.
Muchas gracias por eso. Mi
I
nombre es
coordinate the
Ben
work of
Schachter.
the Office of the UN
Coordino
High Commissioner for Human
el
Rights
trabajo
on environment and climate change.
del UN
It's our pleasure
de Naciones
to
Unidas.
be co-convening this
Creo que es
discussion
conveniente empezar con esta convención
with the others
con
and
los otros
to have you join us here today.
que nos han
I'm going to discuss
que están junto con nosotros ahora.
and share with
Me
you
voy a
some thoughts about
voy a
how
discutir
the
y compartir algunos
process
pensamientos de
that
cómo el
will
proceso
begin later
va a
today
empezar hoy día
on of the UN General Assembly on
de la
the
Asamblea
potential
del UN
adoption of a resolution to recognize the human
para
right to a
recolectar
clean, healthy, and
las
sustainable environment. Is
los
both
derechos
informed
humanos
by and
y el
should
desarrollo
inform
sostenible.
the
Voy a hacer
implementation
la
of the
implementación
2030 Agenda
de la Agenda
and
2030
the
y
negotiations
las
of the
negociaciones del
post-2020 Global
post-2020
Biodiversity
Marco
Framework.
Global de Biodiversidad.
So let's start with a little context. In
Empezar un poco
October
con el contexto.
2021,
En
the Human Rights
octubre de
Council
2021,
passed its
el
resolution
Consejo de
48/13,
los Derechos
which
Humanos
recognized the human right to
ha
a healthy
dado su
environment for the
EDS
first time.
2030, no se
The
reconoce los
resolution
derechos humanos
encourages
en
states
relación
to
con el
adopt
ambiente por primera
policies
vez.
for the enjoyment of the
Es
right
realizar
to a clean, healthy, and sustainable
implementar
environment
políticas
as appropriate,
para
including with
lograr
respect
un
to biodiversity and
ambiente de
ecosystems.
desarrollo.
The 2030 Agenda for
La
Sustainable
Agenda del
Development
2030 para
emphasizes
Desarrollo
that human
Sostenible
rights must
enfatiza
lie
que los
at the
derechos
core
humanos
of truly sustainable
es
development that
el
cuts
corazón
across the
del desarrollo
economic and
sostenible
environmental
y que
social
cruza todo lo
dimensions.
que es el desarrollo
For years,
económico y
rights
social.
holders have
Por
pushed
años,
for
para
universal
empujar
recognition
esto
of the human
y
right
que
to a
sea
healthy
reconocido el
environment.
derecho humanos para que
Building
ayuden al
momentum toward the
ambiente,
Human Rights
lograr un
Council
momento para el
resolution
Consejo
adopted last
de los
year
derechos humanos
and
que
the
se ha
General
adoptado el año
Assembly
pasado y lograr una
negotiations that are going to
asamblea
begin later
que va a
today.
empezar
The Sustainable Development
después,
Goals
más tarde de
clearly
día.
make the
El
case.
desarrollo
Achieving them,
2020
including the
logra este
protection of
caso.
biodiversity,
Lograr
would
la
not be possible without
biodiversidad,
gender
la protección
equality
de
and the
biodiversidad
fulfillment of the
no va a
human right
ser,
to a
no va a
clean,
ser,
healthy, and
no se va a lograr
sustainable
si es que no
environment.
se enfoca con
Gender,
de género
biodiversity, and
y con los
human
derechos
rights,
humanos.
including the right to a healthy
La
environment, are
biodiversidad
inextricably intertwined.
y los derechos
Gender
humanos
equality is
están
both an SDG in
relacionados.
itself as
El
well
post
as a
2020
necessary means
es
for
necesario para
successfully and
lograr
sustainably
un
achieving the other goals, including the
éxito
protection of biodiversity,
y poder proteger la
SDGs 14 and
biodiversidad, y
15,
lo de S
which is a
14 y
key
15,
element
que
of
es
the
una
human right
clave
to a
para
healthy
los
environment
derechos
and
humanos que
critical to
ayudan a
ensuring all people
que los
have
derechos
safe
humanos ayudan
and
al
adequate
ambiente,
food
para
and
que
water,
las
that they are
personas
healthy
estén
and their livelihoods are protected, that they can
saludables y que
participate
tengan
in
comida y
decision
que puedan
making,
participar en
and
las
that
tomas de decisiones
ecosystems and
y en los
climate systems
ecosistemas
which
y en los
sustain
sistemas
life on our
climáticos, que
planet
es
are protected.
mantenernos con vida en
Environmental
el
harm
sistema de nuestro
also
planeta.
drive inequalities,
Lograr las
disproportionately affecting women and girls
desigualdades
and
también
those in
afectan a
vulnerable
las mujeres y las
situations,
niñas y todas las que
leaving
están en
countless
poblaciones
people behind.
vulnerables, dejando un montón de
Unfortunately,
personas
those who
atrás
speak up
y
to demand
desafortunadamente
environmental
estos
justice and
demandan
protect our environment,
la
in
injusticia ambiental y
particular
proteger el
women,
ambiente y
girls, and
proteger a las
persons with
mujeres
diverse gender
que
identities,
pueden
often do so at great risk to themselves and to their communities.
puedan
This is
lograr
inexcusable.
protegerse entre ustedes,
In a
a
world
ustedes y
in
la
which
comunidad.
all
Esto es
life is at
indiscutible. En las
risk from
mujeres,
nature
entre
loss,
todas,
climate change, and
en el mundo
pervasive
donde todas
pollution,
las vidas
a
están en
situation the
riesgo por la
Secretary
pérdida de
General
biodiversidad y
described
por
as
el cambio climático.
humanity's suicidal war on nature. Environmental defenders should be heard and
Los
honored, not threatened,
defensores de
shamed,
los
and sometimes even killed.
derechos ambientales también deben
So,
escucharse.
all people
Entonces, todas las
everywhere are
personas
entitled to exercise their right to the
deben
effective
cambiar
enjoyment of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment
y tienen
without fear of
derecho a un
repercussions.
ambiente
The right empowers
saludable y
people to
limpio, sin
participate,
repercusiones.
access
Todas las
information, and
personas que
access
participen en el
justice in
acceso
environmental
de la
matters.
justicia y de
It
los
recognizes the
problemas
fundamental
ambientales y de los derechos
linkages
ambientales
between human health, well-being,
tienen
and
que
dignity,
mostrar
and that of the
de la
environment
dignidad de
in
derechos
which
humanos y el
we
ambiente
live.
y el
States
espacio
have an
donde vivimos.
opportunity to reflect
Ver
this
las
reality
oportunidades de
and
reflejar
demand
esta oportunidad y
gender-responsive,
demandar que
rights-based
sea
action
en
in the
género
negotiations of the
responsable con
post-2020
género
Global Biodiversity Framework,
y que el
including
post
by supporting the
2020
standalone goal
GBF
on women's
debe
rights and gender equality.
ser
They can
enfocado
also
con
do
género
so
y
in the
teniendo un
pending
objetivo de meta
negotiations to recognize
de
the right to
género.
a
Esto
healthy
va a poder
environment at the General
reconocernos
Assembly. But
los
recognition
derechos de los humanos
alone
y los
is not enough.
ambientales.
The Stockholm
La
Plus 50
recognición sola
outcome
no es
calls for
suficiente.
action to implement the
El
right to a healthy environment,
reconoce
including in the
acciones que puedan
context of
lograr
multilateral
para
fora,
lograr
such as the
el
High-Level
objetivo de
Political
desarrollo
Forum
sostenible
and the negotiations of the
y las
post-2020
negociaciones del
Global
post
Biodiversity.
2020
A
Pacto Global de
gender-responsive,
Biodiversidad.
human rights-based approach
Un
is how we
enfoque
reshape the
de género
human-nature relationship,
y derechos
support
humanos. Es como nos
implementation of the
relacionamos
2030 agenda,
va a mejorar
and
nuestra
achieve the
relación con la
transformative
naturaleza, va a
change we
lograr el
need
cambio
for people and environment.
transformativo que
This is
necesitamos
why
en el planeta.
OHCHR is
Esto es
advocating for
urgente
integration of human
para lograr
rights in the
incidencia en los derechos
post-2020
humanos en
Global
el post
Biodiversity
2020
Framework,
marco global de la
and why we
biodiversidad
support the
y
standalone
lograr el
target on
soporte
women's rights and gender equality.
de la
Thank
meta
you, and I look
sola
forward to
del
our
género.
discussion.
Gracias a todos por esta discusión.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your
Muchas
work
gracias, Amelia.
letting us know how important is this topic for the Human Rights Office, and particularly how much you are doing to raise awareness and boost policy action around this. Now is the turn of Shruti Ajit, Program Officer at Women for Biodiversity. Please, Shruti.
Thank you, Amelia. It's a real honor to be part of this panel. And good day to everyone. So 7 years ago, when the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, there was a sense of hope, direction towards living in harmony with nature in the midst of climate crisis, extractive consumption patterns, and overall destruction of biodiversity. This blueprint was a guide for countries to address these crises in a just and equitable way. 7 years on, and we still have a long way to go with regards to this. And on top of that, we are still recovering from the pandemic, which has severely impacted the work that we intended to do to achieve these goals. The recent Sustainable Development Goal Progress Report highlights the decrease in rate of loss of forest areas and increase in key biodiversity areas or areas under key biodiversity areas from the last 2 decades. However, it is still not enough to tackle the urgent needs of Earth and its inhabitants towards a peaceful and harmonious living. The report also mentions that it has disproportionately affected women in every aspect, be it health, education, or biodiversity conservation. So the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework seeks to address this immediate urgency through carefully listing down the targets on biodiversity conservation that aims to halt and in some cases reverse the effect of biodiversity loss and degradation. Within that framework, it is only imperative that we build in institutions, systems, and processes that aim to include especially those whose lives are intimately linked to biodiversity and the ecosystems around it, especially the indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. The only way ahead is to include voices of the most marginalized and dispossessed within these forums, where we do not see them as stakeholders, but equal participants and beneficiaries of the work we all intend to do in order to protect and conserve biodiversity. Women need to be in the forefront of the discussions as globally, impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss have further aggravated their situation on the ground. Women now have to travel longer to collect water, food, firewood from the forest for their families and households. There's an increased incidences of gender-based violence, and their participation in key decision-making body is still something that is being debated and constantly needs justification, even though their contribution impacts various aspects of health, livelihood, and conservation, and they are also known to be keepers of traditional knowledge systems. So with that, when we talk about gender equality, we shouldn't see it in silos, but for its full realization needs to be viewed in a more integrated and intersectional way. The Target 22, which is part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a standalone target on gender, seeks to ensure gender just and gender responsive response to building synergies. That is also building synergies with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the ones which Amelia mentioned, 5, 14, and 15. So we wish to have a gender responsive and human rights-based approach to be considered even within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, so that it is then being able to help in the full realization of not just the framework, the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also aims in aiding the full realization of the Sustainable Development Goals that we've had for 7 years now. So with that, I'm going to end. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for your insights, and let us know how particularly women on the ground are living this biodiversity crisis, and for stressing the importance of governmental and international commitments to eradicate the inequalities they face. Thank you so much. Now let's hear from you, Catherine Despot Belmonte, Senior Program Officer at the UN Environment Programme, World Conservation Monitoring Center. Welcome.
Thank you, Amelia, and good day to everybody. I think a lot already has been said by Sylvia, Ben, Shruti, setting the scene on current progress and challenges. So before thinking about the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we need to continue focusing on the design. And all of us in the panel have contributed towards the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. A lot of the technical inputs from UNFWCMC and UN Women have precisely focused on enhancing synergies with the SDG process. So we hope that by designing a framework that is well aligned, especially to SDG 5, 14, 15, 17, we will be able to achieve both the targets set in the post-2020 framework, as well as progress towards the achievement of SDG 5, 14, 15, and 17. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your thoughts. And now moving on to the final part of this first round on synergies between the CBT and the SDGs. Please, we want to hear from you, Christina Egenter, Global Governance Policy Coordinator at WWF International.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia, and welcome everybody to this important panel and discussion. As all of my fellow distinguished panelists before me, I think, share the most important points. And I maybe will echo some of them just to reinforce the message. And it's actually good. This is not repetition. It's actually showing convergence. And I think this is the most important thing that needs to happen for stronger gender equality. I'll share the perspective of coming from a conservation organization, WWF, and where we realized that beside nature, gender equality and rights need to be reset at the center of sustainable development and conservation, of course, and including building back after the tragic pandemic. Supporting, safeguarding, I would say, biodiversity and gender equality are to be recognized as effective development strategies. SDGs will not be achieved without securing what Ben eloquently explained, biodiversity, but also healthy, clean, sustainable environment, and of course, fulfilling and protecting the right to it. But it's not just a general global biodiversity framework. We need an ambitious, transformative, inclusive, just global biodiversity framework to support the achievement of SDGs. One that values biodiversity, all nature's contributions, and I underline all of them. It's not just the economic value of nature to society, but also the agency, those behind and those custodians, those keepers of biodiversity and sustainable use, especially the agency of women. There is definitely, as mentioned by in the opening remarks by Sylvia and others, there is a momentum building. There are gender plans of action in all Rio conventions, and this is extremely important to reinforce synergies towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But what else needs to happen? And I'd like to just say a few words on a critical issue, the one of visibility and recognition. Without visibility, there is little recognition. And we know in the informal economic sector in particular, while statistics are going up, there is good numbers, rising numbers about women occupation in the formal context, but in the informal sector continues to be dominated by women without the due of rights and protection in many ways. And the parallel critical situation of an informal sector exists also in natural resource management. And this is the big gap that the GBF also needs to address, ensuring that the contribution and roles and practices of women to defend, protect, and sustainably use biodiversity are well documented. And I think this is critical to achieving that full, equal, and informed participation in policy decision makings that women and women agency deserve. And participation is not just about numbers of people, representation and leadership position. Of course, these are important numbers to achieve and secure and safeguard. But it's also about the capacity and the voice for women, especially to influence policies so that they can be gender responsive policies and laws and legal frameworks, and also influence the policy arena and the power dynamics around that policy decisions. All of this is key to removing barriers and enabling more gender equality. I will stop there. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Christina, and all of you, dear panel. You have definitely said it clear. There are many possibilities for synergies between both agendas. There are already joint actions that are taking place, driven by government or by the civil society, and we must continue to develop them so both the lives of women and girls, as well as the prosperity of biodiversity, become a reality. Now, let us move to our second round of discussion. And considering that the human rights were identified as a prerequisite for a gender-just, sustainable development and for the realization of the CBD 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, in first place, I would like to ask Catherine to tell us what are the most promising strategies and actions today for overcoming gender inequality and discrimination. And if you can tell us how can the empowerment of women and girls accelerate SDG progress, recovering from COVID-19 and implement the post-2020 GDF. Please, Catherine.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm going to touch upon the issue of visibility and the lack of data that have been mentioned by Christina and Sylvia. Is very important to make visible the role that women and girls play in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and their role in their environment. The issues related to decision-making, to access and to the benefits from conservation and sustainable use, and their equal representation in decision-making have been highlighted at a global scale, but it's very important to understand these issues and the challenges at the local and the national level. And there's a great example from Costa Rica. Many countries face the challenges of collecting data, of using indicators and visualizing this information. So what Costa Rica did is that in partnership with international organizations, with UN agencies and their local organizations and their own ministries, what they did is that they wanted to understand the role that women and men play in, specifically in the forest sector, to think about sustainable options for restoration and the sustainable use of forests. And what they did is that they overlaid data from the national statistics offices, as well as environmental data that had been collected through different projects. For example, one of them, RED+, but others. And with support from technical capacity from UN agencies, they did overlay analysis, trying to understand what areas of the forest were being used, which areas needed to be restored, identify the role that women and men play by using sex disaggregated data. And with the analysis and maps that they generated through this study, they were able to update their policies and the strategies. And these serve to identify interventions and solutions that would benefit local women and local men. This is just one specific example from Costa Rica, but there are similar efforts that are being carried out in Mexico and Malawi, for example, and I think they provide key best practices that show us what it means to address gender equality on the ground. What does it mean to make visible the roles that women and men play in the environment? And this is well aligned to the SDGs goals that are being reviewed right now in the high-level political forum, and also aligned with key goals and targets from the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing these concrete examples, because by doing so, you tell us that there is no excuse of not making these synergies agendas, and also that governments
sinergias y que nuestros gobiernos están viendo un poco eso y están comprometidos para dar estos objetivos. Y ahora voy
And I
Pero
will
el resto
ask
de nuestro
you
panel.
to first Christina to address
Y
our
primero
question
Cristina
regarding how
del
could the
coordinador
integration of human
político.
rights-based
Vamos a ver
components
cómo
into the
esto,
post-2020 GDF
los
contribute to
derechos humanos
addressing
pueden
the
contribuir
5,
para
14,
abordar
and 15.
el CD
Please,
5,
Christina,
14 y
the floor
15.
is
Gracias,
yours.
Cristina.
Thank you.
Gracias.
And
Y
thank
gracias
you,
por
Catherine, for making very clear the point and
hacer todo
providing
muy
excellent examples. I
ejemplos
think that
excelentes.
explains
Creo
more
que esto
than a lot of other
explica
words.
de
What
los
needs to be done and
trabajos, pero
can
que
be
tiene
done.
que
I think this is
hacerse y
important
lo que necesita hacerse y lo que se está
I would
haciendo.
say that
Voy a decir que
again, as a conservation
como
organization, we
una
come to realize
conservación,
that
una misión de conservación,
a
nos hemos dado
GBF
cuenta que el
that is
GBF
not a global
no,
biodiversity framework that is not embedded in a strong
no hace
rights
partido
framework
en
is not going to
un
be successful. It's not
si es
going to
que
be
no se invierte en
transformative.
un
It's
marco
not
de
going to be
derechos, no va a ser
ambitious. It's
transformativo,
not
no va a
going to
ser
be all
ambicioso,
that
no va
we
a ser
need to
exitoso,
have
no va a
in
ser todo lo
order
que
to
necesitamos
address the
para tener,
biodiversity
para
crisis,
abordar
and in
la
doing
crisis de
so
la
also
biodiversidad y
addressing
para
the other
instaurar
crisis.
para,
And this
y
framework
para abordar
also
todas las
needs to
crisis.
be
Este marco también necesita ser
accountable, that is, can be
que
verified,
puede
what we are
contarse, que
actually can be measured, but it can be
tenga
also
que ser medible, que
verified
tiene que ser responsable
and see what
y tiene que
impact
ver
and positive
los impactos
impact has had
positivos
and whether it's
que
working.
hay y
And
lo
we
que
also
es,
think
y en lo
that
que
the
se
key issue
trabaja, y
here
creo que el
is
problema principal es
supporting, and this is what
soportar
women caucus
mujeres
within the
caucus
CBD
en
negotiation
el
has
CBD,
been
en el
wonderful in
CBD ha
pushing
sido
and advocating for a gender standard on target, the
generado una
famous
incidencia genial
target
para
22.
la meta
Well, it's
22.
not yet
Todavía
formalized
no está formalizado, pero
on gender equality. And this is
y
also
inequidad de
something
género, y
as
eso es algo
most civil society
que los
strongly
mayores
support,
de la
and
organización
party
social
support has been
apoya
very strong.
y
Embedding
las
a target
partes
is
apoyan
helping the accountability of the framework on very
hacerla.
important issues. After all, we are talking about half of the humanity. Is not a small number of people.
La
That
rendición de
can
cuentas,
be
la
game
humanidad no es una
changer,
pequeña
can
parte de las
be
personas que
those
pueden ser el cambio,
agents that
que pueden
help
ser los agentes que
transform
necesitan transformar
the framework, but help address
el
the
marco,
biodiversity
pero
crisis.
también
And the
abordar
gender
la crisis
target
de
has
biodiversidad.
as
La meta de
Sylvia
género
mentioned in the beginning, three
fue muy simple en
fundamental
el
components:
comienzo, pero ha sido un
participation,
componente
rights,
fundamental, la
and
participación
benefit. And
de
the gender
beneficios.
equality target would also bring the
Y el
overview,
objetivo de género
recognition,
también
visibility, and
da la
support
visibilidad, el
to
soporte y
women
el
as
reconocimiento de las mujeres
ecological agents and
como agentes
biodiversity,
ecológicos en la
as rights
biodiversidad
holders and
y
not only
como
beneficiaries. This is also goes
personas de
along with
derecho y no solamente
another important
beneficiarios.
component, which
Eso es
is
algo importante, un
ensuring
importante
women's
componente, que es
economic
asegurar
empowerment
que el
at
empoderamiento de
scale.
las mujeres
And
en la parte
because
económica. Y
with their
esto,
agency, with their knowledge, with
con
their
su
practices,
conocimiento,
they
con
can
sus
only
prácticas, no
help
solamente pueden
transform
ayudar a
consumptions,
transformar
productions, address those
las
drivers of
producciones, los
biodiversity
consumos
loss. We
y
need new
abordar estas
models of
crisis de biodiversidad.
economic
Necesitamos nuevos
development,
modelos de
and
desarrollo
women
económico,
are
y las mujeres
naturally and
son naturalmente
historically
y
well
históricamente
placed to contribute to that.
que pueden contribuir a esto.
And in doing so, also addressing
Y hacer eso
historical
también
discrimination, poverty,
para ver la discriminación, la
all
pobreza,
caused,
todo lo que ha
especially
causado
women have
especialmente
been, especially women in rural
las
areas and
mujeres,
indigenous women
las
have
mujeres
been
indígenas que han
victims of
sido
this
víctimas
because of
de esto, porque
insecure land rights, because poor access to market, to education,
las
to
tierras
financing, to
los derechos inseguros
information,
por toda la
and
información que se le ha negado
cultural
y
traditions.
todas las tradiciones
I think it's
culturales.
also,
Creo que
on the other hand,
también
also
en otra
important to
parte es muy
recognize,
importante
bring visibility to
reconocer,
all the
traer la
positive
visibilidad de todas
initiatives of
las
women,
iniciativas
by
positivas de
women,
las
the
mujeres,
solution that
por
they
las
are
mujeres, la
bringing,
solución
and
que
there are
ellas están
many of
pensando, y
them.
que hay muchas de
A
ellas.
lot of them are
Muchas
the
de
result of
ellas son los resultados
self-empowerment
de
without the
empoderamiento
enabling
propio,
condition, but still
sin,
struggling and fighting and
pero
proposing good
lograr
initiative. And all these
y han
local
logrado buenas
initiatives,
iniciativas.
most of
Esas
them
iniciativas
at the
locales,
local
muchas de
level,
ellas en
are
el nivel
matter
local
and are important to
son
be supported and to
importantes
be
y son
recognized.
importantes que sean
This
reconocidas
is
y
something that
apoyadas.
we need
Eso es algo que
to
necesitamos
keep in mind while
tener
working
en mente
on
mientras
broader
trabajamos
and more enabling
con
condition at national
condiciones
level. And
juntan en
equitable access to
nivel
land and
nacional.
natural resources is critical for women economic
Usar los
empowerment.
recursos
And
naturales
environmental and economic decision
importante
making.
para el empoderamiento de las mujeres
This is
y
important.
la
So
toma de
in
decisiones es
the context of
importante
GBF,
en
I
el
just
contexto del marco
end
global
by saying that
post-2020
it's
decir
important, it's fundamental
es
to
importante,
have
es
the
fundamental para
gender
ayudar
standalone
un
target and
objetivo
gender
de género
equality,
solo
but it's
en
also
equidad,
important
pero
how
también es
to see
importante
that
cómo
target
ver
catalyzing
objetivo
the
cataliza
mainstreaming, the gender
y
responsiveness that needs to be in all the other targets and goals of the framework. And I think it's possible. It's not just target in silos,
integra toda la perspectiva de género
but this needs
en
to
todo
permeate
el global post-2020 y en todas las acciones que se necesitan, y
entire
es algo
framework for
permanente porque va a
results.
guiar los
Thank you.
resultados de todo el marco global post-2020.
Thank you so much, Christina, for
Muchas gracias,
this
Cristina,
holistic answer
por esta
for the
respuesta
discussions that we
holística.
Not
Entre las
only
cosas
here,
que
but
tenemos, no
also
solamente
in the
escuchamos, pero también
scope.
el global
You have
post-2020,
mentioned
alcanza el global
many
post-2020.
crucial topics,
Has
such as
mencionado muchas partes muy importantes
economic
como
empowerment,
el responsable,
joint
empoderamiento de
governmental
género,
action, responding to the
lograr
citizen priorities.
acciones de
But
gobierno.
I will proceed with our next speaker.
Voy a
so we can
pasar con
have
nuestro siguiente
conclusion and more
ponente
discussion
para
later
poder
on,
mantener
based on
más
all of
discusión
the
sobre
thoughts.
esto.
Now I will
Ahora voy
give the
a
floor to you,
darle
Shruti, to
el
discuss
piso a
about
Shruti
how could
para
a
discutir
gender
cómo
responsive post-2020 GBF could contribute positively to the achievement of the SDGs, and how could mainstreaming the human rights-based approach, particularly
un
the
global
rights of the
post-2020
environment, rights to
va a
land and natural
poder
resources, could help
lograr esto y cómo podría
support the
ayudar
implementation of
la
GBF
implementación
and
del
SDGs.
GBF y
Please,
de los
Shruti.
Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible.
Thanks, Amelia.
Gracias. Gracias, Emilia.
I'm so glad that
Estoy
we also
muy
touched
agradecida
upon
que nosotros
visibility
podamos lograr la
because
visibilidad.
it's a personal
Porque lo
example
personal,
that I always I want to ask everyone
que quiero
who
preguntar
is
a
listening
todos
in today. How many of us grew up
¿cuántos de
with
ustedes han
our
crecido
grandmothers and mothers
sus
sharing
abuelas
home remedies for biodiversity around us?
y madres que
We
han
are a
compartido
generation that is losing this knowledge, at least for me.
sus remedios caseros? Somos una
Not only
generación que
because
están
of
perdiendo sus
my
conocimientos,
changing needs and
no
aspirations,
solo por nuestros
also
cambios
because
y
I don't seem to
expresiones,
connect
sino porque
with
parece que no
what is
conectamos
around me because I don't see them. I don't
con
see
ellos,
any of these tiny medicinal plants
no
that
vemos
used
esas
to exist
medicinas
when
que antes parecían
I was growing
existir
up.
mientras
It
que
no
crecíamos.
longer comes,
No
and it's because of
viene por
monocropping, land fragmentation,
monocultivo, la
dispossession,
fragmentación,
which is rampant.
la
And
disposición
with biodiversity loss,
y con la
things that we grew
biodiversidad,
up
las
with
cosas con las que
vanish
crecimos,
from our vicinity without even
desaparecen de
us
nuestra
noticing.
vecindad sin que
Until
nos
you
demos
have a
cuenta.
researcher or somebody,
Hasta que un
or
investigador
someone big coming
o
and telling us
alguien
that, hey,
viene
you
y
know,
nos dice
this is gone. It's
que
when
esto
we
se ha
start
ido.
noticing. But however, our
Sin
mothers know,
embargo,
our grandmothers
nuestras
know
abuelas
that
saben,
this world is
nuestras
changing.
madres saben que el
And
mundo
the
está
younger
cambiando.
generation who
Las
are
generaciones
growing
más
up
jóvenes
listening
están
to
creciendo
what it used to
escuchando
be
lo que
are
solía
often
ser
fearful of the world that is being left to them.
y a menudo
So
temerosos de lo
it's
que
very, very
el mundo se está
important
dejando
to
para ellos. Es muy
visualize
importante
the role of women,
que el rol de la
especially
mujer, especialmente
in case of
en el
biodiversity
caso
conservation,
de
of
la
these
conservación de
tiny
biodiversidad,
knowledge systems that is slowly
este
losing
sistema de
out, which is
conocimiento que estamos
also very
perdiendo.
pivotal to
Es muy
understand
importante
what kind
conocer
of or
qué
at what
clase,
level
en qué nivel
biodiversity loss is
de
happening.
pérdida de
It's
biodiversidad
no
está
longer
ocurriendo.
about it's no longer just
Es
about
no sobre,
this many
no es sobre lo
species
que,
or this many
cuántas
tigers or this
especies,
many rhinos
cuántas.
or the big massive species, but also at these
También
levels
es importante
and how
en
those are
pequeños niveles
interlinked to
y eso integrado
everyday
a
living and everyday being
nuestra
of
vivencia
all of us.
y a cómo somos nosotros.
With biodiversity loss
Con la pérdida de
and the
biodiversidad
loss of knowledge, it's
y el
also linked to
reconocimiento
loss of
está
culture
también
or cultural identity.
unida,
And it is very important
es muy importante
to be able to preserve and
saber
conserve
cómo preservar
biodiversity. We need to see these
y
linkages
reconocer la
of
biodiversidad
traditional knowledge systems, the
y
cultural
los
identities
sistemas de
to
conocimiento
help
tradicional que
to food
ayudan,
security.
que pongan la
And
seguridad.
it cannot be seen in silos.
Y eso no se puede
So having a human rights-based and gender responsive
Tener-
approach to the post-2020 global
Tener
biodiversity
un
framework
enfoque
will
de-
emancipate those who've been repressed by decades
basado
of
en los derechos humanos
colonization,
en el
exclusionary
reportaje va a
conservation
emancipar
policies, and land
y va
degradation.
a
This will also enable
reglas
the
de
full realization
colonización
of
y
many
frenar las
elements
políticas.
of the Sustainable Development Goals
Y
and build
también
synergies with
va
already
a
existing
hacer que
work
se
on ground towards
realicen
a
muchos de los
transformative
elementos
and
del Objetivo de
reformative
Desarrollo
living.
Sostenible y crear
Now, the three
sinergias
elements that Sylvia spoke
para crear la
about, which
transformación y
build
reformación que
synergies
se
with all
necesita.
aspects of SDGs,
Hay
especially
3
14, 15,
elementos
16, and
del Objetivo
17,
22
and allows for affirmative
que
and
se
gender just
necesitan
action for the fulfillment of Goal
específicamente que
5.
permitan
Our one is the recognition of land
la
rights
recognición
for women and girls.
de el
Now,
derecho de las
according to
tierras para mujeres y
the
para
Sustainable
niñas,
Development Goal Progress Report of
acordado
2022,
al reporte
it
del
says that
2020, muestra
it's
que
only in 8 countries that women have
solo
a
en
higher
18
share
countries
than men among the
que
landowners.
las
And
mujeres tienen,
the
en 8 países que tienen más del
disaggregated data,
70%
even
del
after
derecho a las
7 years
tierras.
since the Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted, is
SDG
very, very small, or there is no data in some cases.
No se ha
So it is
adoptado bien
imperative to have that
en muchos
as
lugares.
a first
Es
step.
importante tener esto como
And
primer
then
paso
second would be to
y de
amend
ahí luego
various
tener
land ownership policies which would recognize ownership as
políticas
fundamental rights for
que se
women.
reconozcan
The
los
second
derechos para las
aspect of Target
mujeres.
22
El segundo
talks
objeto
about
de
full
la
and
meta
effective
22
participation. And I think
es que
Christina
tenga
has
una
already spoken
participación
about
efectiva y
how we
completa.
need to move
Y
beyond
Cristina ya habló de eso, cómo
these
tenemos que
tokenistic
mover
forms of representation
sobre
and
esto
build
solamente de la
processes that
representación y
ensure
crear
the
procesos que
informed
aseguren
participation.
la participación
And
informada.
thirdly, the third aspect of Target
Y el
22
tercer
talks about
aspecto del Objetivo
equitable access
22
and benefits
es tener un
from
acceso a
conservation and
beneficios
sustainable
equitativos
use of
de la
biodiversity.
conservación y el uso de la
Now,
biodiversidad.
as
Ahora,
we have so
como
many international commitments
tenemos
like the Rio
muchos convenios
Convention, the
internacionales
Sustainable
como
Development Goals,
el
the
ODS,
IT targets, and now we have the
el Aichi Targets, y
post-2020
ahora
Global
tenemos
Biodiversity
el
Framework.
GBF, el
And we
post-2020,
could see a
y
lot
esto
of
puede
linkages, but
ser
however, there
cómo
is very little
están
awareness of these on ground
unidos,
also,
pero
and how people could even use
cómo
this.
las personas pueden
So,
usar esto.
and
Entonces,
countries already have built
las
processes and
países
institutions,
tienen
and
esos
they already
procesos
have
e
these
instituciones
institutions in
y
place
tiene
for attaining these commitments.
para
So
lograr
one must
estas
look at
cosas.
strengthening
Entonces uno
processes
tiene
where
que
there have
ver
been some
fortalecer
positive
estos
development
procesos donde ha
with
habido
respect to
desarrollo
advancing human
positivo
rights and
con
gender rights,
el
and
enfoque
rectifying
de los derechos
processes which
humanos
has
y de
failed
género
with regards to implementation
para
or achieving these
implementar o
commitments
lograr
on ground,
esos
instead of starting
compromisos
from scratch.
en campo
This would help
en vez de
build
empezar desde cero.
those
Esto va a ayudarnos
already existing
a
processes on
crear los
ground,
procesos y fortalecer que ya
and
existen
people would be able to get a
y las
sense of how
personas
these goals and targets
para
could
hacer
be
cómo
strengthened,
estos métodos
and
pueden
how,
fortalecer
as
y
Christina mentioned,
como
could
Cristina mencionó,
they ask for
hay
accountability, transparency,
la responsabilidad de
and
transparencia,
also ask
rendición de
for
cuentas.
a better system to be put in place,
Eso
which is
también es
more
importante.
collaborative
Eso es más
and
que
less
colaborar
top-down, and is coming
y
from
menos
more from the ground.
a venir
And
más,
it needs
más
to
desde
also
el trabajo en
coincide with
campo.
the existing legislation, national laws and policies, and could be
Las
used as a tool
legislaciones y
for
políticas
advocacy to
nacionales
press
nos
for
van a ayudar
implementation, better
a
implementation and
implementar.
monitoring.
El
This would
monitoreo
also
también
create
es
awareness
importante.
which would
Esto va a
enable higher
crear
participation for
reconocimiento
those
de
on
una
ground,
participación mayor
especially
para
from the
ese campo, para
marginalized
esto
groups, like
de los
like
grupos
mostly women and
marginalizados,
girls.
que son
So,
generalmente las mujeres y las
at the
niñas.
end of it, it
Al
is
final
very,
de
very
esto es muy
important that
importante que
we need to have
necesitamos,
there is a lot of synergies that
hay
we
muchas
could see,
sinergias que podemos
but it needs
ver,
to
pero
be
necesitamos
it needs to ensure that these are
asegurar
kind of
que
built in
estas
such a way that more
se crean,
participation
se
comes and
fortalezcan de una
more
manera de
ground up approach,
participación
and
y
therefore
que sea
there is
un enfoque
some
mucho
sense of
desde campo y que
accountability,
tenga
some
una
sense of
sesión
transparency,
de
and
rendición de cuentas, de
therefore moving
transparencia
towards a more transformative
y que
world
crear que el mundo
that
sea
we
más
intend to
transformativo
achieve through
y,
these targets.
y lograr
Thank you.
estos objetivos. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And now we are going to move on with Benjamin from the Human Rights Office. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think I'd like to echo and will echo a lot of the remarks of those who've spoken before me. Just want to focus on the ways biodiversity loss affects people. They are different on the basis of gender, owing to entrenched and systemic gender-based discrimination and violence against women, stereotypes, resource limitations, differing nutritional needs over the life course, especially during infancy, childhood, pregnancy, and childbirth, and differing levels of exposure to environmental hazards. And as a result, states, businesses, international organizations, and other actors have procedural and substantive obligations and responsibilities under international human rights law and international environmental law, as well as international policy commitments to address the biodiversity crisis, including from a gender perspective. Applying an HRBA, a human rights-based approach to the post-2020 negotiations, includes ensuring the related processes are inclusive and participatory, and that participation is meaningful, informed, and effective. Access to information and access to justice and accountability are principles that should be embedded in the process of the post-2020 negotiations, their outcomes, and implementation. There are also principles reflected in the 2030 Agenda, including Sustainable Development Goal 16. The integration of women's rights and gender equality in national biodiversity strategies and action plans offers a critical opportunity to address the gender biodiversity nexus in the context of efforts to implement the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The principle of non-discrimination, which is fundamental principle of the human rights-based approach, is also a critical part of the 2030 Agenda, including SDG 5. So we know that gender responsive and rights-based action has to be reflected in biodiversity action. The question is, what can we do about it? And what are we doing about it? So OHCHR co-leads interagency work to advance the right to a healthy environment across the UN system, including under the Secretary General's call for action on human rights. OHCHR's key messages on human rights, the environment, and gender equality, which I shared earlier in the chat and were developed jointly with UNEP and UN Women, make it clear that states and businesses do have specific human rights obligations related to the disproportionate and intersectional impact of environmental degradation on women, girls, and persons with diverse gender identities. However, even while, and this is really important, experiencing differential and disproportionate impacts of environmental harms, we have to remember that women and persons with diverse gender identities are leaders in environmental action as managers of resources and advocates of sustainable lifestyles and defenders of land, water, nature, and communities. And the facts bear out that if we empower women, women and girls, we can actually make a difference, both in the effective enjoyment of their human rights, but in outcomes for all people. And so I'd say, in the last decades, 55% of the improvement in food security in developing countries came from programs promoting women's empowerment. We need to do more to ensure meaningful participation of women with diverse backgrounds in relevant decision-making processes. And this approach is a legal, ethical, and moral obligation, but it will also make environmental action more effective. So we've got to work together to create tools, laws, policies, and understanding needed to support gender-responsive, rights-based environmental action. OHCHR field presences work to strengthen protection mechanisms for environmental human rights defenders, promote accountability for environmental harms, address the gendered impacts of environmental degradation, and provide technical support for gender-responsive, rights-based environmental action. But our capacities are limited, so states need to back up their commitments, and other stakeholders as well, to the right to a healthy environment with effective gender-responsive mobilization of resources that are so desperately needed to protect the environment and to support efforts by the UN system to do so as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your insights. And thank you so much to all of you, dear panelists. With your remarks, you have made blunt that the integration of human rights and the adoption of this approach in the post-2020 GDF is a game changer, driving transformative action that could help to achieve the SDG 5 on gender equality and strengthen the nature goals, the so-called nature goals 14 and 15. And even more, I think that now that most of the development policies are just focusing on recovering from COVID-19, with your insights, you are showing us that it is really possible to build back better while ensuring gender responsiveness, but also taking care of nature. Now, I would like to move on into our next section, which is an open dialogue with the audience. So if anyone has a question, I will invite you to raise your hand so you can come into the floor to have this dialogue with our panelists. Or if you don't want to raise your question by voice, please just type it down in the chat and we will address them. I can't see any question. Please let us know, or simply raise your hand so we can give you the microphone. If there are Spanish speakers, you can also raise your question in Spanish because we have the interpretation with us. Or if you want to type it down in Spanish, we can translate it. We have one question from Magdalena. Magdalena, ¿quisieras decirnos para quién va esta pregunta? She's asking which is the major challenge that we are facing now and how we can collaborate. Magdalena, ¿quisieras decirnos para quién es del panel o es en general? Well, I think that if any one of the panel want to answer this question, please go ahead. Yes, Ben.
Sure, I can start. Thank you, Magdalena, for the question. It's a broad one. And I think part of the difficulty in answering it is that it's not really a single problem that we're confronting. It's a plurality or a bunch of problems, which are often interconnected and interrelated. So in the environmental context, we're talking about the triple planetary crisis, which is pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. But that triple planetary crisis is deeply interlocked with rising inequalities, power imbalances, entrenched and structural discrimination. And really a problem rooted in the way that the world and human societies currently work, which is why I think when we hear and see the language of the 2030 agenda of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, when they're talking about vision, they're talking about transformative change. They're talking about reimagining humanity's relationship with nature. That's what we need to do. But I think when we get to the practical, steps that are needed to achieve that change, then we get rooted back in these old patterns. Then we get stuck in the sort of minutia of negotiations, of differences of opinion about how to get there. And frankly, of a system that has perpetuated the current status quo, leading to environmental destruction, leading to gender-based violence and to discrimination against women and many other people based on different and intersectional status. So we have to realize that what we're pushing for is a radical change for this vision. And what we've been unable to figure out is how do we actually get there? The international community has agreed we need this radical change, but the steps to getting there and the process to getting there is what hasn't been worked out. I think a big part of that is finance. Not the only part of it. There's another big part of it, which is changing how people behave and think and act, and you know, changing how government institutions respond to rights holders versus other entities that engage with them. But a big part of it is addressing some of the financial issues and the way that our economic system works, so that we redistribute wealth to eliminate inequalities, so that we establish a basic social protection floor. So I know all of these things are sounding a little bit far afield from the initial origins of our conversation, but actually when we talk about a social protection floor, we're really thinking about that as something that is a basic fundamental necessity to be able to protect the environment as well. So, you know, I think, you know, understanding this big picture and trying to be able to address the multiple challenges that we're facing in a sort of comprehensive and holistic way is really critical. And that's where we think the right to a healthy environment, which actually brings together environmental aspects, social aspects, and sort of participation rights, all under one umbrella, can be a really critical tool in advancing and addressing these issues in multiple contexts, including the context of implementation of the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and work to achieve the objectives of the 2030 agenda.
Thank you so much, Ben, for answering. In the chat, Magdalena is saying that you and all of us, we can't own with them. She works in a university, and that there is a youth group that work together, and particularly with her specialty on bioethical ecology. Thank you so much, Magdalena, for raising this question, and I will know if anyone else from the panel wants to reply to this.
Yes, Amelia, I'll reply. I'll try to reply briefly, and I think just reiterating the importance of gender equality. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen the difference that it makes having women at the decision-making table in high levels of power. They've led the way successfully in addressing this challenge. So UN Women has done an amazing job at showing within the process of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, the linkages between gender equality for not only for achieving this specific goal, but also for the achievement of all the SDGs. And this approach has been seen as something to follow within the post-2020 framework, and that's why the target 22 on focusing on gender equality is seen as something important to follow. So there's an opportunity in the post-2020 framework to make it gender responsive by focusing on gender responsiveness. We're saying we're highlighting a number of things: the importance of having a standalone target, the importance of collecting data that can show us, can show us the bigger picture on the roles and responsibilities and the contributions from women and men, ensuring that women have a role at the decision-making table, not only focusing on the framework itself, but also on the implementation mechanisms. We're talking about capacity building, the implementation of the gender plan of action, financing, as been mentioned. And if a gender responsive post-2020 framework is designed with view of implementation, this is going to contribute to all of those SDGs that are being reviewed this year, SDG 5, 14, 15, 17, and enhance the efficiency of efforts towards environmental and gender equality goals. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And I will ask then if someone from the panel wants to address this question, or someone from the audience, if you have, yes, please, Celia. We can't hear you again, sorry. Yes.
I don't know what's going on with my system.
Yeah, we can hear you now. I'm so sorry, Sylvia, we lost you. Maybe if you try with your headphones. Okay, don't worry, Sylvia. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Nancy, we can see that you have you want to speak, please.
Sí, muy buenos días a todas y agradezco mucho por la invitación porque
Nancy,
realmente...
Nancy, si nos das un momento, she's going to speak in Spanish, so please, if all of the English speakers can go into the interpretation room to listen to her question. Para que, Nancy, si nos das un momento para que vayan a la traducción de inglés y puedan escucharte.
Sí, está bien, gracias.
Adelante, Nancy.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Realmente, primeramente quiero agradecer por la invitación. Yo soy del pueblo Misquito de la costa caribe de Nicaragua. Mi nombre es Nancy Elizabeth Enríquez. Vengo trabajando con las mujeres indígenas de la costa caribe de Nicaragua. El tema de la biodiversidad a nosotros nos interesa mucho porque lo hemos enfrentado y lo seguimos enfrentando como pueblos indígenas. El tema del cambio climático con todos los que hemos estado enfrentando, el cambio climático, cómo nos afecta a los territorios indígenas, a las mujeres indígenas, porque de una u otra forma lo hemos enfrentando más después del año 2020. Enfrentamos 2 huracanes en la costa caribe, ETA y IOTA, y después con todos estos cambios lo hemos enfrentando diariamente, tormentas, inundaciones que viene a afectar la producción. Actualmente estábamos esperando, preparándonos para lo que venía de otro huracán aquí en la costa directamente donde nosotros, pero pasó por otro lado y eso no deja de afectar las inundaciones ahorita en los territorios, en las comunidades. están llenos de agua, se han llevado muchas casas, los niños están sufriendo. Esto con la seguridad alimentaria afecta mucho porque pierde la producción y luego nos quedamos sin comida y eso viene a afectar mucho en lo que son a las mujeres con el cambio climático que estamos viviendo en la costa, los pueblos misquitos de Nicaragua. Entonces, para mí, pues, no logré escuchar desde el inicio, pero es importante que nosotras las mujeres no solo estemos participando en reuniones, sino que estemos en la toma de decisión y también que podamos lograr el financiamiento para poder seguir apoyando y trabajando el tema de la biodiversidad y el cambio climático. Muchísimas gracias. Buen día.
Muchas gracias, Nancy. Thank you so much, Nancy. And I would like to know if someone from the panel would like to answer, respond, or comment to Nancy's comments.
Amelia, just quickly to say, I don't think that there was, this was a question, but it was great that Nancy provided a clear example of the challenges that indigenous communities face in terms of biodiversity degradation and biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. And it's a good example to show the urgency of addressing gender equality and biodiversity environmental objectives, because these have local impact, local communities.
Impactos locales.
And we don't have time. The post-2020 framework needs to be aligned to the
Género
sustainable development
tiene que
agenda
ser
precisely to be able to
alineado con
address
ese eje para
the
lograr.
issues that Nancy was highlighting.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I see, Ben, that you also want to react to the comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I think Nancy's comments were highlighting something important, right? Which is that we also need to think about how climate change and the biodiversity crisis intersect. And so, you know, climate change, of course, is a driver of biodiversity loss. It's also the response to climate change is a response that is looking at conservation as a potential solution, both in terms of mitigation and in terms of adaptation. And there's an ongoing discussion, which is really important within the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, about how to reflect this relationship between the climate process and the biodiversity process. And one of the things that's really critical, particularly when it comes to indigenous peoples' rights, is that we avoid a situation where climate change mitigation and or adaptation efforts actually result in negative impacts on the rights of indigenous peoples with respect to their lands, resources, territories, and traditional knowledge. And that's something that's the subject of discussion in a variety of targets within or relevant to the discussion related to a variety of targets within the post-2020 biodiversity framework. And of course also relates to the question of gender equality, particularly when you're thinking about issues related to land tenure, where so often legal systems discriminate against women and girls, that, you know, all of these things are really interconnected and need to be part of how we think about and approach the triple planetary crisis from a gender responsive basis. And finally, you know, the point I think I've made previously, right? But going back to the need to make available the resources to reform the legal systems so that we do empower women and girls and so that women and girls when they seek to exercise their rights, persons with diverse gender identities as well, are able to
y
do so,
puedan hacer,
you know, it will benefit the environment,
va a
it will
beneficiar
benefit
el
human
ambiente, va
rights,
a beneficiar
and
derechos humanos,
it's the right thing to
y
do. So
eso
just
lo
thinking about all of
mejor
these
hacer pensar
interlinkages
en todas
really
esas
is something that
sinergias.
Nancy's
Creo que
comment
es algo que
brought to
Nancy,
mind
comentario
for
de
me.
Nancy me ha recordado eso.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Muchas gracias,
We have
Ben.
in the chat
Tenemos en el chat
comment from Silvia,
un comentario de
replying
Silvia
to Magdalena question.
que se refería a la pregunta
I
de
won't read it
Magdalena.
out, but
Lo voy a
Magdalena,
leer.
if you can read
Magdalena, si es
directly
que
the message. Well, our translator can also support you with this message. And we have a question coming from
tenemos una
Julia
pregunta.
Pinta, and
que
she
viene
would
de-
like to know from the panelists
Pues le quiero
your
saber de
views on
panelista
how the post-2020
cómo el post-2020
in the view of this recent COVID crisis, how could this
mira de esta
intersect with gender
COVID-19, cómo puede ser
equality
integrado
actions
con
and
el
strategies? If you can
género,
just give
de
one or two comments
estrategias de
addressing
género,
this, the intersection between recovering from COVID-19
recuperarnos del
and
COVID-19 y el
gender equality.
Global 2020 y el equidad de género.
Who would like to go into this?
¿Quién quisiera empezar esto?
Right? Come in?
Yes,
Hola.
please.
Yes. So,
Entonces,
if there's one thing
sí, lo que
that the pandemic has taught us is
la pandemia nos ha hecho
also
ver es
examples of resilience
ejemplos
coming from
de la
communities,
resiliencia
especially
de las
women
comunidades, especialmente de las mujeres,
who have,
que
when the
tienen,
entire world went into lockdown, there were communities, indigenous people,
cuando
and local
nos
communities,
hicieron cuarentena,
especially
hubieron
women, the
mujeres,
small-scale
comunidades de
farmers, who were
mujeres,
small-scale farmers, who were able to sustain and be
ganaderas,
resilient
agricultoras,
in the
que
midst of
nacieron para
lockdown, only
sostener
because their lives were
a
so
las
linked
comunidades,
to the
posiblemente porque
biodiversity.
sus
So
mujeres
they were
estaban alineadas con la
able
diversidad,
to be resilient
pudieron
during the pandemic. And such stories
sobreponerse
of
a la pandemia, y
resilience
esa es la razón de la
are
resiliencia.
often not
No
highlighted.
siempre se ha
And we
presentado.
only see stories
No
of
solamente
distress
vemos historias de
and
estrés
stuff like, what is happening to the
en
world.
lo que pasa al mundo.
But
Pero
these small examples or
estos
stories of
ejemplos
resilience are also
y de
indicators
resiliencia
of
también nos dicen
how,
de cómo,
like Ben spoke about
como
climate,
lo que Ben
the
dijo,
linkages of climate
las
change and
sinergias
biodiversity loss,
del cambio
what
climático y la
happens
biodiversidad, lo que ha
and how
pasado, y
communities
cómo las
and
comunidades,
especially women
y especialmente las
and
mujeres,
women in
las
local
mujeres
communities
de
and
comunidades
indigenous people
locales,
are able
mujeres
to
indígenas,
adapt
posible
to these
adaptarse a estos
various challenges, which is
cambios,
either
a estos
man-made or
retos de una
natural,
mejor manera.
could do. And therefore, those
Sería
knowledge
esto.
systems are very important
Sistemas de
and
conocimiento
needs
son
to
muy
be taken
importantes y
into
necesitan
account.
ser tomarse en
And
cuenta.
even after the
Y
resilience
aun
of
cuando la
these
resiliencia de
the
estos
examples
ejemplos,
of resilience,
los ejemplos
apart
de
from
esto,
that,
aparte de eso,
there has been a growing trend
hay
of more and more women being linked to,
una
let's
tendencia
say,
de mujeres
agriculture. Like in the case of India,
juntas a
as
la
more and more
biodiversidad,
men are
más hombres
migrating to the
se
cities
migran
for
a la
work, for
ciudad para trabajar,
diversification of their income. It's
para
the women
aumentar
who are taking
sus
care of
ingresos,
their
las
farms.
mujeres
It's
son
the
las que se
women who are doing
encargan,
more farming.
las que
Similarly,
hacen la
with
agricultura.
pastoral communities, more and more
Comunidades de
men
pastoras,
or
más
the
hombres,
male members of the households are traveling outside to cities to look for
los
jobs,
hombres
and
están
it's the women who are taking
viajando a
their
trabajos
animals for
locales y son las
grazing.
mujeres
Now
las
the
que se encargan
problem,
de
the
criar el
challenges that they
ganado,
face is
cultivar,
gender-based
y los
violence.
retos son
The forests are no
los
longer accessible to them.
no
For
tienen
farmers,
acceso a
they
los
still don't have
fondos
ownership, even though
o que no
they are the
tienen
ones who do
tenencia de
most of the
tierras,
work.
a pesar de que ellas
So
son las que
with
hacen
the target
el mayor del
22,
trabajo.
it
Así
seeks
que
to
el
address
objetivo 22
these issues,
quiere abordar
where
estos
they talk
problemas
about
y hablar
equal
de
or even ownership, the tenurial rights of women
la propiedad,
needs
la
to be
tenencia de la
recognized.
tierra de las
And that's what
mujeres, que eso
Target
tiene que
22 does,
reconocerse.
which is one
Y
of the
eso es lo que
things.
queremos
The
hacer, que es
other
una de las
aspect
cosas.
is to
El otro
ensure their
aspecto
participation in
es
these key
poner la
decision-making bodies,
participación de
which
estas
talks about
mujeres.
their agency without actually having them there. So decisions about
Las
women are
decisiones de
being
las
made
mujeres
without women
se
being
hacen sin
present
que las
there.
mujeres estén presentes.
So it is very important
Entonces,
for
eso
their
es muy
informed
importante
and
para
full and informed and effective participation. And of course, the access rights the benefits of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity more often than not is never handed out to women. So these three elements that I mentioned before, which is part of the Target 22 under Global Biodiversity Framework, which is also a part of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the Goal 5, will be able to build synergies there and enable the gender equality aspect of things to be able to advance towards a more just equitable society. So that's my response.
Sostenible. Así que esa es mi respuesta. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Shruti.
Muchas gracias,
And we have
Shruti.
another comment from Selena, but I
Tengo
think that
otro
this was
comentario de
already
Selena, pero
addressed.
creo que esto ya fue
She was asking a
abordado.
bit
Estaba
about the intersection
preguntando
of
sobre las
biodiversity goals and
intersecciones de la
climate change
biodiversidad
and how this could be
y cómo esto
integrated in the
podría ser
policy work.
integrado
But
en el
now
trabajo político.
I
Ahora,
think that it was already a bit discussed by you then. So, and for the sake of time, I would ask Alfania to move into the last part of this session, which is the closing remarks.
voy a
And,
pedir que
I will ask
que el panel que se mueva a la última parte
Christina was raising her hand. Okay, so sorry, Christina.
del panel que es el cierre.
Or maybe you could make the
Cristina,
to the
de
closing
repente
remarks
podrías hacer
with your comment and your conclusion.
No, if you, yes, thank you, Amelia. If you allow me
Amelia,
to just underline the importance of the stories of resilience that Shruti mentioned. And I really wanted to comment along those lines because we have been relying on those stories of resilience for far too long. And so one of the challenges, and the women take on this additional responsibilities, these additional burdens, and keep securing food and care and water and whatever for their communities. So, but this has to change. And I think coming back to the first question about challenges, one of the challenges really, and I think it's also a way forward, how we need to strengthen, come together as a civil society, as we are doing, diverse voices, but converging and strengthening advocacy, because if these best practices, these stories of resilience, these stories of self-empowerment stay as only best practices, they will never change the world. Things will stay the same. They need to become influence policies. They need to change the legal framework to enable security, protection, gender equality. And I think that's the most important thing. If I may conclude, just say that gender equality is not just an issue for women organization or for human rights organization. It really needs all of us. Conservation organization, businesses, governments, and there are many champions of governments for this coming together. Because it's only with gender equality that we can secure our future and for the future generations.
Generaciones futuras. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Muchas gracias, Cristina, por estas palabras.
Before giving the floor
a
to
darle
next panelist, I will ask our audience if you are able to open your camera.
Pueden, por favor, al público abrir su cámara para empezar a seguir tomándonos fotos de nosotros mientras que nuestros panelistas siguen diciendo sus últimos comentarios. Y decir esto, voy a darle la palabra a Ben para que nos diga sus
Amelia.
conclusiones. Muchas gracias, Amelia. Creo que
I think we have the roadmap. You know, we have the SDGs. We've got some incomplete pieces when we're thinking about the negotiations of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We have the human rights treaties, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the other core human rights treaties. So we know what we need to do. And the challenges that we haven't been able to implement. And that, I think, is
Creo
a
que
result of some of
esto es
the issues I described before.
por los problemas que he
Discrimination,
descrito antes, la
structural
discriminación,
inequalities,
en
so on
la
and so forth.
estructura, inequalidad,
In the way we get
en la
past that,
forma en la que hemos
I
pasado
think
esto,
really is for
necesitamos
more and more people
más y más
to
personas
become advocates for
se
gender
creen cientes
equality,
para la equidad de
to
género,
push
para
for gender equality.
empujar
So Christina
esto.
talked
Así que
about
Cristina
needing
habla
to move beyond the good practices,
de las buenas
examples
prácticas,
to wholesale implementation.
implementación.
And so I think
Y
that's,
creo que
you know, I think that's where we need to
creo
go.
que esto es algo que
And
necesitamos hacer.
we look forward to working to do so, to working to
Estamos queriendo trabajar
advocate for
en esto
mobilization of
para
resources, to
crear
working
la
to
incidencia,
support
para
implementation of
trabajar
the
en los
Human Rights
recursos
to
de
a
las
clean, healthy, and
naciones,
sustainable
para
environment,
trabajar
and
con
to working to
derechos de
secure
mujeres, para
that
trabajar
strong
para asegurar
standalone target on women's rights and gender
objetivo de
equality in the
género
post-2020 global biodiversity
solo
framework.
en el marco
But
global
we
por
have to move
2020,
beyond
pero
just getting
tenemos
those
que movernos
words
más allá
right
de esto, de las
to getting
palabras,
the actions
para
that
crear las
follow
acciones.
right. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, Ben. And now we
Muchas-
want to hear from you, Shruti. Which are your reflections from this session?
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this panel. There's a lot to learn and there's so much more to do. As Ben said, we've already got a lot going, and we need to find ways to strengthen certain institutions which are working. We need to rectify the ones which are not addressing, which are not just, and we need to have a space for reflection. Of course, we have the monitoring mechanisms, but there is very little space to be able to go back, correct, and come back to it. We need to start building systems for those reflections and rectifications. A lot of what Sylvia mentioned about systemic changes, it will only happen if we were to start questioning what is already ongoing with what we need, which is a more gender just and more transformative society. For the transformative society, we need it to be something which, like Sylvia said, it's not just a women's issue, but everyone's issue, because it impacts everyone equally. Patriarchy as a system does not just impact women, but also men and other gender diverse people. And that is the problem of the institution, the principle, the system that has been put in place. And we need to change that, and we need to start right away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And now we're moving on to you, Catherine, please.
Yes, I'll be quick because my fellow panelists have already covered the key issues. One element that we need to consider is financing and resource mobilization, obviously, to meet these challenges and to meet the gender equality objectives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I would like to know, Sylvia, if you want to come into the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very sorry for that. Thank you very much for this rich panel. And I agree with what colleagues have said before. We need to strengthen partnerships. We need to encourage each other not to get tired, because these crises are ongoing and the challenges are ongoing. And we need to look at targeted actions to ensure women and girls can benefit fully of natural resources, of land, that they can fully participate and be leaders and be recognized as leaders. But we also need to recognize that these issues are not women's issues. We need women and men and gender diverse people to commit together for gender equality and human rights, so that we transform institutions, policies, and I would say also keep transforming ourselves. Thank you very much.
So sorry, I lost connection for just 1 second, but I guess that you finished your message, Silvia. Thank you so much for that. And now, well, I would like to thank all of you, our dear panelists and our dear audience, because this event hasn't been able to be a reality without any all of you and all the effort that you have put before it and during it. I would like to tell you, everyone, that we are going to prepare a short document based on all the reflections that the panelists have shared, and including Silvia's reflections, because the main idea of this event, as Tina has mentioned in the chat, is to influence the process that is going on right now. You know, the high-level political forum, where countries are reviewing the progress about how they are doing with the SDG 5, 14, and 15. And that's the idea of having this reflection, these insights about, from the different organizations that are represented here today, how they think and how they have seen that these synergies can be done. So we are going to share this document with all of you because you have been registered, and you can spread the word also with your networks and with the people you know that are in New York right now in the discussions of the high-level political forum. We will share with you also a survey, a feedback survey after we close this call. So please answer it so we are able to improve our work as a host of these kind of events. Thank you so much once again to Catherine, Benjamin, Shruti, Silvia, Christina, and all of our team, the interpreters, Ale, Daniela, Sharon, that are helping with the technicalities. Also to Claire and to Tina, we hope you recover fast. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you in the next time. Goodbye.
Bye. Maybe ask the speakers to take a quick photo